YouTube, now is the time to turn your camera off. I'm going to just quickly get started and do my introduction so that we give our guests enough time to speak tonight. My name is Ruth Kapelis. I'm the National Content and Media Relations Manager here at JDRF. And I'd like to welcome you on behalf of everyone to tonight's Let's Talk T1D educational series. We're very excited to present you with more information on participating in clinical trials. We'll open with a brief overview of clinical trials and then turn it over to our special guests who will share what it's like to actually participate in a trial. If you're new tonight, welcome. JDRF is a global leader in working towards an end to type 1 diabetes, or T1D, through research, funding, and advocacy. We also support people and families in the T1D community from the time of diagnosis by helping those living with T1D to have better, healthier, and safer lives while we work to find cures. As visitors on this land, I would like to begin by respectfully acknowledging that the JDRF Canada National Support Office is located on the traditional lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. So we attempt to bring information into your home about every other month on topics of interest to the T1D community. We also host a virtual connection series on the fourth Wednesday of every month. This is an unstructured opportunity to connect with others in the T1D community, and there's no formal programming for that. The next one will actually be tomorrow evening, and then followed on April 24th at 12 and 7 p.m. Just a couple of technical things. There's a raise hand button. If you need any clarification during the presentation, you're welcome to raise your hand. We also have a chat function, and we encourage any questions to be posted in the chat, and we'll try to get to all of them time permitted. We are recording this, and we will be posting it to YouTube tomorrow, and we will also share it by email tomorrow, and we will provide a JDRF contact email address in the chat if anyone has any comments or feedback from this session. Clinical trials are an essential stage of the research process and are the only way to investigate safety, tolerability, and efficacy of new potential therapies and treatments. Any treatment that is being developed for eventual use in the clinic must first be tested in a clinical trial. This can include drugs, medications, devices, virtual care platforms, behavioral therapy, education, and more. Without them, medications and therapies that could improve quality of life may never reach the people who could benefit from them the most, and that's why this is such an important thing for us here at JDRF. So I'd like to introduce Lara Green, PhD, our National Manager of Research and Training Programs here at JDRF Canada, and we are also joined by Aude Van-Nini, who lives with T1D and has participated in many clinical trials, and Adam Caleb, MSc, Research Assistant, Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario, or CHEO. You have a very long title, Adam, who supports youth behavioral trials in pediatric endocrinology. I think I got that all. And now I'm going to turn it over to Lara.
Thank you so much. So great to see so many faces here. Really excited to present. Let's make sure everybody can see my screen okay. All right. Let me know if that's not working for you. Hopefully that looks okay.
Yeah, we can see it.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And as a starting disclaimer, I have 2 small children at home who apparently don't want to go to bed tonight. So there is always the chance that a toddler will run into this room, and I apologize for that. Hopefully it doesn't happen. All right. So as Ruth mentioned, I'm going to give you a quick presentation on clinical trials. We'll then have Aude speak, Adam, and time for question and answer discussion. So as you likely all know, our vision at JDRF is a world without type 1 diabetes, and our mission is to accelerate life-changing breakthroughs to cure, prevent, and treat type 1 diabetes and its complications. And so let's just jump right into clinical trials. So what is a clinical trial? It's a type of research that studies new tests and treatments and evaluates their effects on human health outcomes. And this is a pretty vague definition because clinical trials can very much range. So any treatment that's being tested for or being developed for eventual use in a clinic must first be tested in a clinical trial. This can include drugs, devices, virtual care platforms, behavioral therapy, education, and many more. So anything that will be used clinically basically has to go through a clinical trial. For example, every iteration of the insulin pump, as you may remember it, has gone through a clinical trial to bring it to market. So that is thousands of participants over the years that help participate in these trials to move these new pumps along or devices, etc. So when we talk about clinical trials, we typically talk about them in phases. And sometimes you'll often hear research referred to as preclinical research. And basically, this preclinical research means that it's not in humans yet. And once it goes to human testing, that's considered clinical trials, and it happens in phases. So, in order to even go to clinical trial, sometimes those first ones are called first in human trials. And a lot of data is needed to present to Health Canada in order to get approval for testing in humans. So in this, there has to be a lot of safety data. There has to be a demonstration of efficacy that the drug is going to do what they hope it's going to do. And a lot of this comes from animal models. These animal models are also highly controlled by ethics and animal care committees, and are designed basically to show as much data as they possibly can. In phase one, this is the proof of concept or first in human. And sometimes the expected response is actually first tested on somebody without the condition. So sometimes these are just using people without diabetes. That's fairly rare, but it can happen if they just want to check first the safety of the intervention. That's typically looking at a drug. And so this is using small number of participants. As it moves to phase two, this is typically testing the drug again or the treatment again, and it's looking at a larger number of participants, and it's typically comparing it to a placebo. So you might hear that, placebo effect, or that somebody gets a placebo, which is like an empty capsule, basically, comparing it to a drug. And then in phase three, this would be considered a pivotal trial. So here you're hoping to get enough data to demonstrate to Health Canada that it should be approved for widespread clinical use. So a lot more participants will be included. And in phase three, the treatment will be compared to the existing standard of care. So let's say they're testing a new type of insulin. It's going to be compared to comparable previously existing insulin to see if, number one, it's safety, always checking for safety, but to see if it's efficacious. So JDRF funds over 70 clinical trials around the world, but we know that a lot are delayed. Over 80% are delayed due to low participation. And the number one reason that people don't participate is because they don't know about the opportunity. So we wanted to look at how you can find out about clinical trials and what it's like to participate. So at JDRF, we developed the T1D Clinical Trials Finder. Part of this is because less than 1% of physicians refer to clinical trials, mainly because it's so difficult for them to keep up to date about ongoing trials with their ever increasing demands. So we know that it's hard enough for physicians to have enough time to see their patients, let alone to stay up to date with quickly moving research. We suggest that if you're interested in clinical trials that you seek them out, and you can always take that information to your endocrinologist or physician if you feel like you want to get some assurability from them. So I'm just going to go through a quick peek at what this finder looks like. Just to note that anybody can go on this website. Ruth has put it in the chat, so thank you very much, Ruth. Anybody can take a look at this website. You can browse it. You don't have to sign up for it for anything whatsoever. But if you would like to receive alerts on clinical trials that are becoming available, then you can sign up for an account. And signing up for an account, like I said, just gives you the ability to receive new alerts every time a trial comes available in Canada. And you can even filter if you want. So for example, if you're a parent looking for your child, you can filter by pediatric or, over 65. If you're only looking for a certain location, you only want to do virtual trials, there's a lot of different filtering criteria. And if you want to set your alert criteria, then you'll only get those alerts if you'd like. So I'm just going to give you a couple examples of some studies. So number one, which is, probably the easiest way to participate in a clinical trial, is a registry. So a registry is considered an observational clinical trial, which means that there is no intervention. The trial is not giving anything to you, but it is observing you. So it's asking for data from you. And the reason that a registry is really important in any disease is because it helps organizations like us and other researchers get a better picture of what the disease looks like within a certain area. So the Better registry, that's this one up on the screen, is all of Canada. Anybody can sign up. If it's a young child, then the parent signs up on their behalf. And that gives us data, things like how many people in Canada are using CGMs, are using pumps, how many people, are using various medications aside from, just taking insulin, all sorts of information that we can then use and also other researchers can use. So it's very much a platform for us to all have lots of information. So we highly recommend anybody signing up for that. It's entirely virtual. Another example is a drug. So typically when you see a drug trial, you'll see lots of inclusion and exclusion criteria. Sometimes this seems limiting, like, maybe you don't fit the criteria, but this is done really specifically to try and get a very narrow group to start with. And as it moves through the phases, typically this eligibility window widens and opens up a bit more. So this, for example, is a drug that's looking at preventing hypoglycemia. So this could be the first of its kind if it goes through trials and is approved. And lastly, another study I'm sure lots of you have heard about, a lot of the new breakthroughs with islet transplantation. So this is a stem cell derived islet transplantation done by Vertex. And again, you'll see typically stricter criteria when it comes to these more intensive trials, but also a really great opportunity. And one thing that I'd really like to mention is that all of these trials have information about the locations that they're recruiting. And it's just really important to note that depending on the study, they might have a large budget to support somebody traveling to one of these locations. So they often have a budget to support the time that you spend in the clinical trial, driving to and from, potentially even flying there, stay if needed. So there is a travel budget associated. And for somebody who thinks that that's the barrier, the cost of participating, the cost of taking time off work, it's certainly something that you're giving up, and studies will uh, try and compensate you for that as best as they can. So we're going to hear lots about being a participant from Ode next, but I just wanted to mention a couple things that we have heard from our community. So we did a big survey about 2 years ago now in our community to say, what do you know about clinical trials? What are your thoughts on them? And we got a lot of common concerns, a lot of repeated messaging. So there's lots of things to consider, certainly when being part of a clinical trial. And these are definitely personal decisions and something that you shouldn't take lightly. But an important thing to know is that it's the responsibility of the trial team to make sure that they're explaining everything to you, give you a lot of informed consent, right? So you typically sign a long consent document and to answer any questions that you have. So a couple of these number of these questions are on our website and have like a little bit of a frequently asked questions section to learn more about them. I mentioned, you'll see some compensation and paying for parking and travel and things like that. Again, study budgets typically have some room to cover that. Your doctor, you can speak with your doctor about being a part of clinical trial and get their input, of course. And then depending on, the intensity of the trial, if it's for a drug or a surgical intervention, that medical team will work with your current physicians to make sure that you're completely taken care of. If it's a different intervention, behavioral exercise, maybe being part of a device trial, then you can speak with your doctor, but it may not greatly affect your current management or care. Typically, we see that there's just improvements across the board. Of course, side effects are common with any clinical trial. Or sorry, I shouldn't say common, they're possible for any clinical trial, and any anticipated side effects are always detailed prior to beginning. The study team will let you know of all of that, and they're also recorded and managed very closely by a dedicated safety committee. And then lastly, one of the most important things I think that you need to know is that you maintain all of your freedom and rights when you're part of a clinical trial. So it is up to the participant that they can withdraw from the trial at any point in time. The more medical the intervention, the trial team will work with you to ensure that you are safely withdrawing, if it needs to be slowly removing the drug or working with your current health team, but it is always your choice if you decide to stay in or leave a clinical trial at any time. So as I mentioned, we have lots of this information on our website, and we're always happy to speak more about it as well. We love to hear from you. So if you've got any questions, I've got our email there in the up on the screen, and I'm sure that it will be in the follow-up email that you get. So please reach out to us. Please check out our website. We're happy to hear any of your feedback. And I am very happy at this point to be able to stop sharing. And I'm going to introduce Aude, who will speak to you from her experience as a clinical trial participant. So thank you so much for being here, Aude.
Thank you very much, Lara. Hello, everyone. So my name is Aude Bendini. I live in Montreal. I am 44 years old, and I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in 1991. So that was, let's say, that was a while ago. Somehow you may see or label me as a kind of clinical trials guinea pig because I've participated to more than 15 clinical trials so far. And so you might wonder why, what's the motivation out there? So first, I was lucky enough to be introduced to the general theme of clinical trials because my endocrinologist happened to be a researcher as well. So that's how I heard about clinical trials, and that's how I got involved in the first place. And over the years, I must say, obviously, my experience has been very positive, mostly on a purely human and moral, from a purely moral and human perspective, because as a person living with type 1 diabetes, I've for long had the impression that, well, I was living with the disease, and except for taking care of myself as good as I could do, there was nothing else that I could actually do, because I am a professor in philosophy, and obviously philosophy can do a lot of things, but not help people with type 1 diabetes having a better life. And so I was just seeing over the years all the improvements. As I mentioned earlier, I was diagnosed in 1991, and if someone had told me at that time that one day I would be able to manage my glycemia and deliver a bolus of insulin through my watch, of course, I wouldn't, I would not have believed it. And there we are. So obviously someone has been doing some work, and not only researchers, and of course Adam will give us the perspective of the researcher here, but it happened because some people like me, for once, got involved as well. So if you are curious about how things go and how things works behind the doors, and to have a glimpse of what medical research actually do, and how researchers think and reflect and envision hypotheses and elaborate protocols and so forth and so on. That's a very nice way to get a new perspective on type 1 diabetes, and to endorse a more positive and active stance towards the disease. So if you want to make a difference for all the people living with type 1 diabetes, be it in terms of improvement of the treatments, or even in the perspective of, we hope so, a cure, well, it won't happen if you're not there. So I really strongly encourage everyone here to, both make your part of the job as far as you can do it. And as Lara explained, there are multiple options that you might consider getting involved to. And on the other hand, it's probably a very nice way to express your gratitude towards all those researchers which are working on our behalf for alleviating the burden of living with type 1 diabetes every day. So for me, it was a complete discovery, all this biomedical research world. I met amazing people, I must say, and it also, from a very personal perspective, it really helped me to come to terms with the disease somehow, because for once I felt that I was active and not just experiencing and living with the disease, whether I liked it or not. For just the sake of a quick testimony, I participated in a very interesting study, and the idea was whether the kind of dogma that all endocrinologists and diabetes educator would claim, that every time that you have a low blood sugar, you have to take 50 grams of glucose or whatever, wait for 15 minutes, and only after that see whether your blood glucose is back on track, or if you're still low, then another 15 grams of glucose and so forth. And I always thought that this was a kind of golden rule, and every time that I don't behave like this rule states, I felt like I was a bad person somehow. But I guess that everyone here can relate. Sometimes, depending on when the hypoglycemia hits, you don't have time. You just rush for candies, and of course you overeat, or you feel like 15 grams is not enough, or after 10 minutes, because you're in a rush for work or getting the kids at daycare, well, you want to be sure that your blood glucose is not going to plummet again, so you overeat. And what I discovered, thanks through this study, was that actually everybody does the same, first. And second, the clinical trials showed that, well, most of the time, 15 grams and waiting 15 minutes, that's not enough. It all depends on what you've been doing before, your state of stress, and blah, blah, blah. So it was somehow a huge relief for me to discover that something that I thought was an absolute dogma and could never be put into question actually was not that well grounded in the science. So I learned a lot about diabetes, about how the research work, and how also, that's why I was talking about the human experience, how we can team up with those researchers whose job is actually, and they're very dedicated, their job is actually to help us at the end of the day to get a better life with type 1 diabetes. So if we are all working for the same goal or in the same direction, then let's team together. And I guess that that's how we're going to beat this.
Thank you so much, Aude. And I really, really appreciate your perspective. If you don't mind, I'd also just like to note that a lot of these research teams also have patient partners as part of them. And so, Aude, if you don't mind my saying, Aude actually now participates as a patient partner. So she's helping to design a lot of these studies to, make sure that they're answering the questions that are important to people with type 1 diabetes, make sure that they seem realistic to somebody who goes through it on a day-to-day basis. And I think that makes a world of difference. So thank you, Aude, for being a part of research in that way as well. Now I'm going to turn it over to Adam. And Adam, as Ruth introduced him at the beginning, Adam is a research associate at CHIO, the Children's Hospital. And so he's going to talk about, being part of clinical trials research from the research team perspective, and particularly what that looks like with youth. So Adam, I'll turn it over to you. Are you okay to share your slides, or would you like me to pull them up?
Yeah, absolutely. I've
Okay,
got them here. I'll just present. Can everyone see that okay?
that looks great.
Okay, perfect. So, hi everyone, my name is Adam. Just wanted to say thank you to JDRF just at the start for inviting me to participate in this talk tonight. I'm going to be presenting the researcher's perspective on a trial. This trial was conducted at CHIO with a large team. The principal investigator is pictured here, Dr. Maddie Robinson. So I'm just going to give some insights into how we kind of design a trial, what the background is, what kind of considerations we have in place in terms of the patient experience, how to keep everything safe and smooth running. So we created a trial that's called Teaching Adolescents with Type 1 Diabetes Mindful Self-Compassion. And this is more of a behavioral intervention. It's to offer a mental health intervention during adolescence that addresses diabetes distress, specifically using what's called a positive psychology lens. So something that leverages kind of the inborn psychological, emotional strengths of youth with type 1 diabetes. The rationale behind this was this has kind of been shown to have an effect in other populations. So in adults, when this type of intervention was given, it showed a decrease in diabetes distress amongst those adults. Yet this hadn't been shown amongst youth So there's kind of a gap in the knowledge there. So that's kind of a starting place for a lot of research studies where there's a gap. Someone has an idea. How can we get the information to fill that gap? And so the study that we designed is a randomized control trial, which is kind of the gold standard approach to try and show that an intervention, a medication, a new technology, and so forth actually has a positive effect, does something better than the previous version of that, or fills a gap in care. So what we're trying to do here is to evaluate if increasing mindful self-compassion through taking this course improves diabetes distress in youth with type 1 diabetes. So this behavioral intervention, like I mentioned, it's an 8-week course, and it tries to teach youth different sort of mental and emotional skills in coping with diabetes distress. And I've kind of illustrated some of the main components here. So for example, during week 1, they learn about mindfulness, the practice and the concept of mindfulness and self-compassion, how to apply those in relation to themselves and their experience of distress. For example, week 4, where they learn in a bit more depth about what self-compassion practice is, how to engage in that in your daily life, and so forth. And so just a bit more on what a randomized control trial is. So at the outset, everyone who's invited and agreed to participate in the study is gathered into one group. So here we have this box on the left. And this group kind of have similar characteristics because there's, as you saw, specific criteria for entering into a clinical trial. So for us, it was adolescents aged 12 to 17 with a diagnosis of type 1 diabetes. And so that group of participants is then invited to provide some information about their health history, their levels of diabetes distress, levels of anxiety, baseline levels of self-compassion, so that we have one cohesive data set where everyone is included. And then in this next square, you'll see these kind of overlapping arrows. We take that group and we randomly divide them into 2 groups. One group, which is in blue here, they actually follow the course. So they take this mindful self-compassion course. They learn those skills of mindfulness, self-kindness, and so forth over the course of 8 weeks. While the control group below in purple, they actually don't do anything different for now. They're included on what's called a wait list. So they're invited to participate in the same program, just at a later date. So we have these 2 streams happening simultaneously. One group is taking the course and the other is waiting to take the course. And then as you'll see, both of them at 8 weeks have an event happen, and that's a evaluation. So once again, they respond to questionnaires about their experience of diabetes distress, their experience of anxiety, their experience of how much self-compassion they feel in their daily life, and so forth at 3 months, 6 months, and 12 months. And the reason for having these different time points is to see if there's a change over time. And so what our hypothesis is, or what our idea, what we think is going to happen, is for the adolescents that participate in the mindful self-compassion program, their diabetes distress will decrease over time, whereas for the control group who's just waiting to take the program, their diabetes distress will kind of stay stable. In terms of recruiting for a study like this, what we did at the outset is just kind of gather a list of the adolescents in our diabetes clinic who are considered eligible. So again, within that specific age range, and then having a confirmed diagnosis of type 1 diabetes. Of those 337 from the general pool, for example, we have about 300 who are considered eligible. Just to give you an idea about who might not be considered eligible for a trial like this, even if they're in the specified age range, is sometimes people whose diagnosis is very recent, and if their endocrinologist thinks maybe this isn't the best intervention for you at this time, maybe there's other things that you could be focusing on, or otherwise some adolescents who might have a diagnosis of a mental health condition that requires like a more consistent treatment or more regular treatment, because that treatment might have an effect on the results of this study, because it's also evaluating key areas in mental health like distress and anxiety and depression. So the way that we recruit patients typically in our clinic is through 2 strategies. So the in-clinic recruitment kind of looks like when an adolescent and their family is in the clinic at a regular diabetes appointment, the endocrinologist that they're working with will kind of have an idea of what studies are going on in the background, because someone like myself will inform them about what's going on and that they might have eligible patients coming in that day. And so if they have time, they really do try to dedicate some time for this. They take a moment to explain a study to a family and the eligible adolescent. And so for those families who are interested, they're invited to connect to us, so the research team, and then we take it from there. And then the out-of-clinic recruitment kind of involves sending out a cover letter or a study information sheet. We mail those to potential participants, and then a research assistant will give them a phone call a couple weeks later and see if they want to chat more about it. And so for those who are interested, for those who do want to chat more, we go through the consenting process, and this is a very essential component of any clinical trial. So one of the things that is important to note about the consenting process is we're trying to clearly state and demonstrate what actually is happening in this clinical trial, in this research project, what everyone's responsibility is, what the potential risks are, what the potential benefits are, how long it'll take. We always remind people that it's completely voluntary and that you can withdraw at any time without changing how you receive care anywhere else. In order to make sure that we're getting this information across, something that we do first is a capacity assessment. So we really take into consideration the capacity for each participant or potential participant to fully understand these requirements, potential risks, and benefits. And so a capacity could be determined based on their age. So to try to explain all the details of a clinical trial to an 8-year-old, we can't be sure that they're going to understand everything. And so in that case, we would invite a parent or a guardian or a caregiver to become their substitute decision maker. And that's where this distinction between consenting versus assenting comes in. So in general, consenting happens, at least in Ontario, at our clinic, when someone is aged 12 and up. That's just the general guideline that we use, unless the capacity assessment kind of indicates that additional parental consent is necessary. And so for kids who are younger than that, we would present the consenting process to the family. The parent is a substitute decision maker. But we also want to make sure that the child involved has a good idea about what's going on, that they feel comfortable, that they want to participate. So we also explain it to them in terms that fit kind of their age or their capacity for understanding. And so just to give you an idea about the uptake for this particular study, out of the people that were interested, 148 people were enrolled between October 2022 and March 2023, which is nearly 50% of potential participants. So that kind of shows a lot of interest in a trial like this. And we surveyed the participants to ask why they were interested. A lot of people very kindly said they wanted to contribute to research at CHEO. A lot of people said they wanted more support for diabetes and mental health challenges, which again spoke to us to say that these kind of interventions that address other aspects of diabetes care are really wanted and really needed. And then the third point, which I thought was very nice, was I wanted to meet other kids my age with type 1 diabetes. And again, an aspect of this particular trial is that it's a group setting where this course is being given, where people have an opportunity to share their thoughts, their reflections, and so forth. So that was appealing to a lot of the participants. Something very important to mention when talking about any kind of clinical trial is participant safety. So as we mentioned, these are often new interventions, new medications, and so forth being delivered. And so they're very closely monitored, and there's a lot of regulations to make sure everything happens safely. So this trial, the Mindful Self-Compassion trial, it addresses psychological and emotional aspects of diabetes, including, like I mentioned, diabetes distress or levels of depression or anxiety. Because of that, each week's class is delivered by 2 people who are trained in these areas and then also supervised by a clinical psychologist. One other thing that we did to maintain safety was we asked all the participants to keep their cameras on. And this is just so facilitators and clinicians can kind of keep an eye out and see if anyone appears to be visibly distressed or unhappy or confused, which would prompt a follow-up or a debrief afterwards. Another measure that we built into the surveys that happen at the different time points, like the 8 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, and so forth, was that if someone gave responses to any of the questionnaires that are dealing with, say, for example, anxiety or levels of depression, if they gave responses that indicated that there needs to be a clinical follow-up, like a high level of distress, for example, they would be automatically, the endocrinologist on call or their most responsible physician would be automatically notified, and then they would initiate a follow-up. So I'm excited to offer you some of the preliminary results of the study. So again, we did a randomized control trial. Initially, everyone is in the same group and they all share similar characteristics, similar levels of diabetes distress, similar levels of anxiety, similar levels of self-compassion, similar levels of depression, for example. And then this one group is split into two groups, one who takes the mindful self-compassion course and one who's waiting to take the course. And so what we saw at 3 months was the group that actually underwent the course, where they learned about mindfulness, about how to apply self-compassion to their own experience of distress. They actually had a decrease in diabetes distress at 3 months, which kind of indicated to us that this intervention does something. It does what we thought it would do, and it does it to a moderate degree, which is great news, at least in this preliminary stage. And we also saw that adolescents in the intervention group showed an increase in self-compassion. So this course, Mindful Self-Compassion, the main thing that it tries to teach is how to relate to yourself with more kindness, rather than what we might typically do. I know I do relate to myself with like impatience and frustration. Oh, like you could have done better here, like, get it together, that kind of thing. And especially when kids are really following strict guidelines to maintain their insulin levels, we find that that's a common theme that comes up. So this intervention actually showed an increase in that measure of self-compassion, which is very exciting. So we'll see what's to come in the later stages of analysis, and you can find out what happens more when we publish. And here are just some participant testimonials, just to give you an idea of how people experience these kind of trials. One participant offered really nice feedback, saying they really enjoyed the program and the support it offered for kids with type 1 diabetes. They felt that there was a place for support and people listening to what they had to say. At the bottom there, another person specifically related to something that they learned in the course, saying, when I get frustrated or stressed out from either diabetes or something in my life, I get in a comfortable position, just close my eyes and take a few deep breaths, which sounds so simple, but it's not until people take a course like that where they realize where and when that they can apply something like that and see how it makes a difference in their life. So thank you for listening and thank you for your patience. I know it's getting late into this evening, and I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the huge team that was involved in running this study. We have Dr. Maddie Robinson here, the principal investigator, all of our partners. And again, I wanted to take a moment to sincerely thank JDRF for their generous support in conducting this trial. It would not have been possible without their support. And I speak on behalf of everyone in our team, where we say we're really appreciative of the devotion that JDRF shows to youth with diabetes and mental health issues related to diabetes in particular. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Adam. That was wonderful. It's great to hear that perspective. And Adam touched on a few really important points there. One thing that we hear a lot from people is that they're worried about being in the placebo group. They're like, I don't want to go through all of this and then be in the placebo group. But Adam described one type of trial, which is a crossover design or a waitlist design. So every single, I think it was 148 participants, every single participant gets the intervention. It's just a matter of when, right? So some of them got the intervention in the first year and the rest of them got the intervention in the second year. So that's one type of design that we see. That's actually a common design. You don't know, potentially if it's a drug, you don't know which one you're getting first, placebo or active drug, but at some point you'll be switched. So you'll certainly get it. You just don't know when you'll get it. So keep in mind that placebo does not necessarily always mean no treatment. And then Adam also touched on the concept of assent, and that's really important. A lot of people think that you can't participate in research until you're 18, or if you're younger than that, it means your parent is kind of signing off for you. And in fact, that's not the case. Children are involved in decision making. If they have the capacity to consent for themselves, they can. There is no age limit of consent in most provinces. And that's something that is looked at very, very carefully by ethics boards. So if anybody is thinking about clinical trials for their child, that might be something to keep in mind. So I will stop talking. I am going to open up the floor if anybody has anything to say. And Ruth, I know, has popped back on to help moderate. Ruth, do you prefer that people, put it in the chat or put their hand up, or what do you prefer?
Well, I see we have a question from Patty asking about the age cutoff at 65 and up. Can you comment on why? That's not across the board for all trials, I'm assuming?
No.
Yeah.
Certainly there are trials that don't have an upper age limit. So, as I'm sure you can imagine, once you get above 65, which is a somewhat arbitrary point in time, a lot of people do have more complications associated. And sometimes putting an age limit of 65 is just a way to narrow the eligibility. And unfortunately, clinical trials cannot start with everybody and anybody, or there would be too much variation in the group. So if you had a huge diversity of participants in age, in length of condition, like duration that they've had the condition, all those sorts of things, it would be really hard to look at the results and say to start with that they were due to that intervention. So clinical trials typically start with a narrow eligibility, and then as they move on to the next phase, they widen that and widen that. So you'll often see phase 3 studies that have a wider eligibility. And I did see a comment about that, and I took a really quick look. So right now there are 19 clinical trials in Canada that are recruiting, and people above the age of 65 are included in those. A couple are menopause, so if you're male, you're kind of automatically excluded there, but it's also great to see some more menopause research happening in Canada. So there you go. There's 19 options that are all encompassing, not necessarily only for older adults, but all encompassing.
Oda, I saw you had your hand up. Did you want to add something to that?
Just a follow-up on the issue of age and perhaps other barriers to involvement in clinical trials. That's exactly what sometimes researchers need to hear about. For instance, I recently sat on a lab meeting, and the researchers were talking about designing a new trial about the effect of physical activity on type 1 diabetes management. And the way that they designed the study and the trial was precisely with a cut above 65 years old. And one of the patient partners sitting on that board was above 65 years old, saying that, do you really think that we stop doing physical activity after that? And by the way, studying what aging with type 1 diabetes means and involves, that's a huge blind spot in the current research. So the more we hear about you guys and from all the different perspectives, the more researchers will be able to identify specific populations with specific needs. And of course, what Lara just mentioned is crucially important as well, but there are needs. And sometimes it is when you are participating into a trial that you can express your discomfort or your frustration that, yeah, I'm happy that I can be involved in this clinical trial, but what about other types or clinical trials that could address other issues that are more relevant just for me? And it's just an idea that will, at a given time in the future, develop in the researcher's mind. And they are very, from my experience, Adam, you will tell me, but they are very appreciative about the feedback and the way that patients involved in clinical trials can help them to identify interesting research questions. Because when you don't have a lived experience with the disease, sometimes things are not as obvious. I remember once, because the research center in which I participate, they are very focused about physical exercise, and especially hypoglycemia related to physical exercise. And well, I hate low blood sugars. Always, not especially when I'm doing physical exercise. I hate going in a low because I'm walking home after the job, and that's how we are playing our part into the orientation of the research as well.
I can see, Luana, you have your hand up. Did you want to unmute yourself to ask a question? Was it directed at anyone specifically?
No, I just hi everyone. Thank you for amazing presentation. So I posted on chat as well. I introduced myself already. I'm just wondering if, because I always want to do that, and I never understood like a lot about it. I just wondering if this is gonna affect my daily routine as a diabetic, because like I started recently really focus on my carbs, on my exercise and everything, because of my channel, because I really want to help other people, other women with type 1 diabetes, and I really want to share my experience. And I would love to do the clinical trial as well to add this for my help, like on my YouTube channel, and share my experience. Because like I said, I have 15 years. I have like since I was diagnosed like 15 years now. And uh sometimes like the diabetes acts like type 1 or type 2. Like I don't know. I have a lot of different experience as a diabetic, and I really want to understand that like doing clinical trial maybe will help me to understand better. And I, as a pharmacist back home, I have like a foundation uh with that, and it's like I don't know, I just wonder if it's going to change my routine, if I don't know, I don't know like specifically what is my question, but I just about the
Yeah,
routine and everything. Did you
I think
understand what I'm
I
saying?
understand the concern that you have it managed now, you know what the expectations are. Would this interfere with that in a certain way that would make you feel like now I don't have that same level of control? And I think, oh, you're probably the best person to answer this, living with T1 and also having done a number of trials. So may I turn it to you?
Yeah, yeah, I feel you, sister. I guess that the key is whether you have a kind of attraction for self-experiment as well. But as for learning, I mean, I've learned so much about both research, but also about how does type 1 diabetes work, actually, because when you want to figure out what a study is about and how it works, you have to understand the mechanism and so forth. And you have people, there are experts, and they are there just to explain what they are trying to assess and so forth and so on. So of course, once you, well, two things. Once you are involved in a clinical trial, and Lara made it very clear, but that's important, you can quit at any time without explaining why or whatever. Second, if you want to do this, that's true that you have to accept that some part of your life are going to be on hold for a given time, but you know that beforehand. And I mean, it's a transformative experience as well. Sometimes when the clinical trial is over, oh my God, that's good because I had an extra CGM and I felt like a cyborg and blah, blah, blah. But there is always something to gain just because you meet new people, and some of them, well, I was lucky enough to meet amazing people, and some of them now are friends. So yeah, it worth the try, definitely.
Okay, thank you.
So we probably have time for about one more question if we have one. And I noticed we have someone on the call who's Dawn, who's been living with type 1 for over 65 years, which is incredible. And I can see Darren, who, if you visit our website, you can read his story about living with type 1 for over 50 years. And his parents were part of the founding Winnipeg chapter of JDRF Canada 50 years ago as well. So it's really nice to see such a range of people newly diagnosed and people who've been living with it for a very long time, interested in participating or learning more and perhaps getting involved in research, which it's really nice to see. But we have time, I would say, for like one more question or comment. I don't want to keep Aude or Adam too much longer because they did the French one before this as well. So they have been sitting on Teams for 2 hours now. They probably want to get back to their lives and evenings. But was there anything else that anyone wanted to add? Paul, I can see your hand is up. If you want to unmute yourself. Oh, you're still muted. Can I unmute you? Oh, there we go.
Hi. I too have been living with type 1 diabetes for more than 50 years now. And just a comment on being a part of clinical trials. I was offered the opportunity a little more than 25 years ago to join a clinical trial. And it was a trial that was to prove the efficacy of using Humalog insulin in a pump. And being a part of that trial really changed my life. I was lucky enough to be assigned to the right group, so I got the pump immediately. My first 6 months on the pump were very closely watched by the research team, and I can say now that now 25 years later, my time in range is consistently over 90%. And before the pump, I doubt that it was anywhere close. So that's, sort of one experience. But at this point, I too am a little disappointed that there aren't a whole lot of research programs going on that are looking for people of my age to participate. I've offered a few times, been turned down all of those few times. But I certainly, still believe that I have stuff to offer. My body has stuff to offer to push these things forward. But
Why,
it's worth.
we can walk you through the tool if that's something that you'd be interested in, because there may be
Yeah,
for your body, but there may be some.
I have gone through them on several occasions, looking for programs. There, as I say, there just don't seem to be many opportunities.
Oh. Register for the tool, because every time a new one comes up, it'll send you an alert, and possibly as they expand, and wouldn't ask what you would want to put your body through, but as some of the stem cell trials expand, we'll get notifications. So at least register for the tool, because as they come available, it will send you an alert to let you know.
Yeah.
I think though it is 9 o'clock, so I think we should probably wrap it up. I really want to thank Laura and of course Ode and Adam for giving us their time tonight for in French and English. Very grateful to have two bilingual people tonight, and for everyone joining us to learn a little bit more. As I've been saying, I encourage you to visit the tool. We're also here to help, so if you have any challenges or questions or need some support with it, we can certainly help. And I hope that you all learned something tonight. I know that I certainly did, and we hope that you'll join us for the next one. So have a good night, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.